Okay guys, so the 5-minute timer's up and we'll kick off this week's session. As we said before, we were going to talk a little bit about the work that went on last week. There was some really good feedback we received from people. So a lot of the things that we talked to people about was the foundation. And as we've spoke about in these sessions, we wanted people to try to get a little bit more specific, ski specific, on symmetry, on flexibility, on generally how you would make movements and sometimes take for granted in day-to-day exercises, like something so simple as jumping side to side. And lo and behold, with a lot of the people that tried it and tested it, when they went away, videoed themselves, they showed all the same traits that we were talking about. Jumping side to side, the knees were coming in, jumping side to side, the feet were splaying out. When people put concentration and focus on the session from last week, and this is the big point to put across this week, we talked about integrating week 2's webinar, symmetry, into some bounding and some very basic plyometrics, jumping side to side, so basically mimicking a very similar movement that goes on in skiing, especially in the shorter games, short radius turns and jump turns. And when people were sort of put to the test and had to analyze it, you could clearly see that when they were thinking about a certain aspect, one other aspect wasn't so strong. So for example, when bounding and jumping side to side was done without any focus, any specific focus, we were seeing people get great distances, and they were working their way. We made a little bit of a course here for you guys, but as they were jumping, we were seeing great distances when things like symmetry weren't thought about, and people were managing to get good distance. When they were given the task of symmetry, and last week I know we spoke about using a few things that can help create more awareness. So a bit like when you're skiing with your hands on your knees, where you get a lot more feedback as to what your knees are doing in between the turns when you're aiming towards symmetry. So that line between your ankle and your hip, when you put your hands on your knees, you can really tell what they're doing in between turns, and you can actually use your hands to try and perhaps stabilize what might be in skiing terms an A-frame. So from that recap, you might remember last week I used a TheraBand, similar sort of thing this week. With your TheraBand you can tie a certain amount of tension in there, and as we come through here, I'm just going to put this on, and that helped me a lot. That just raised awareness. As I was going through the process of jumping, I could actually feel what my knees were doing. So this raised my awareness. It's the same a lot of people were doing at home. And going side to side, you can feel really good. The symmetry being held in the knees. So that was one thing, but what this week's point is about, it's about more to do with flexion, more to do with extension, more to do with getting some real dynamic movements going. And we're going to build up these movements. So this is not something we're going to just put someone into an exercise routine, perhaps, for example, that maybe an athlete might use, or an instructor or a pro. This is really getting the basics worked. And the reason we want to do it this way and build it up over several weeks is that sometimes when people jump into quite robust movements, unless you're playing it slowly and progressively and gradually, you can sometimes put too much stress on your joints, and where the body's not quite ready for it, something might not feel very nice. It may take you a little bit of time to recover from that. So we avoid those situations by playing it safe and taking it slowly. So today we are going to touch on a bit more dynamics, but the thing we noticed about in the previous weeks is that people were going through this exercise and focused on symmetry. They got some great results with symmetry. We got someone here from our academy who was writing in actually from our academy skiers, and it was Kevin. I'm going to show you Kevin's here. So we'll look at the screen, and if you can see on the brightness, let's turn that up. You might be able to see it. So Kevin going from side to side, really good work, which wasn't at the same position when he was going through. Still some work to do, which we're doing over a telephone call later today, but really good work with his symmetry. Now, with many of you guys that wrote in and sent videos in this week, that was a classic example of when the focus is going into symmetry, the spring, because the concentration's on symmetry, the spring disappeared a little bit. And it's the spring we want to get back. So the flexion and extension we talked about a lot on webinar 5. I think it was webinar 5. We were looking at flexion and extension exercises, creating awareness. And we spoke about it in skiing, that it's always something you can notice when you see a great skier coming down the hill, that they've got a lot of movement range in their legs. It allows them to adapt more, it allows them to control the ski more, bend the ski more, and put pressure where pressure is needed in the turn, rather than the turn drifting away from you. So it wasn't a given that pressure is just going to suddenly be made. And even if someone does sport sometimes off of skiing, away from skiing, and has good flexion and extension, whether it's football or basketball or tennis or whatever, doesn't necessarily mean, as we spoke about before, that it's going to show itself in the same way in the sport of skiing. And there's a few reasons for that. Obviously, it's on a slippery hill. We're wearing plastic boots around our ankles. There are a few aspects that can make things not quite work in exactly the same way. So we're going to do a little bit of work on that today. But from a symmetry point of view, in terms of signing that aspect off, always go back to it, readdress it. Because if you look back on your development over the next few weeks, and let's just say your performance is getting to much more dynamic angles, where you're jumping side to side, but you notice you're getting greater distances, and you're springing, and you're perhaps increased it by 20%. Don't underestimate a few of the foundations. You may want to look back on that, re-video yourself, and just check that is that framework stable, and that's the key to this. So from a point of view of dynamics, we spoke about the importance of getting the leg extension working in skiing, and trying to get a movement pattern working here in the leg, where you know that you've got power to step side to side. And also you can test if you're working on it. We'll be putting people through that later on in this session, one-legged. But I'm going to go through the process of just trying to create a few awareness points. So if I'm in this position here and I'm jumping side to side, I want to know that I can get a good extension, but also I want to land softly. And on the landing, when you land softly, you want to know that you can spring back after the landing to jump in here. And you're working your way through. So it's something that it's not just about making a landing with good symmetry and it hits the ground and the surface. You want to know that you can flex and spring back from it, okay? So that's something we're going to do. I'm going to just talk you through, going to introduce you to Ruri. Ruri, one of our team members. A lot of you guys might have skied with him in Verbier. Ruri. Yeah, Ruri. So now, obviously, we're keeping our distance and being responsible, but Ruri's here because I run out of breath quite often trying to do jumps and then go and talk about it to the screen. So we're going to watch Ruri practice this session just as if he's training himself for his own skiing. It might be for something he's doing from a competitive point of view. Ruri does a lot of free skiing and works with an ambition as a skier, not just as a coach, but to be an athlete at some point too in his career. And his first run, with no rehearsal, you can see how easy it is to get some good movement, but there's still a bit of looseness in terms of how the symmetry works. He's going to go back and just work putting his eyes on his feet, on his legs. And you'll see how, as a skier, once his concentration's set for a 20 centimetre width, look what he does with his feet. He'll work towards lowering down the dynamics, but just trying to keep the feet 20 centimetres as he jumps. So watching his jump towards the left, it widens. There it's back to 20 centimetres. Now that's started to change in the process of just one run, okay? Ruri, if you've got the energy, mate, if you jump back into another one of them. So that's really interesting. So you're looking at a skier with a lot of experience and someone, you know, that you could say works at a very athletic level of skiing. Ruri's no sort of no shyness to jumping off cliffs, but let's look at his feet, see if he can control that width as he comes through. That's it there. That's a difference in the dynamics of how his lateral control's working. So that's great. So we'll give Ruri one more go at lateral control. What we'll do, Ruri, we'll give you this band. If you want to TheraBand your knees out or your feet, maybe the feet. If you've ever been in Ruri's group up on the mountain, you'd have quite often found sometimes that Ruri, if he's got clients he's skiing with, where their feet are splitting apart in between turns, he may well use the power strap at the top of the boot to try to stabilize and create a bit more awareness to allow someone to feel what it feels like to hold the correct width of stance. So in the same way, if Ruri's working his way through this exercise, he's now got an awareness razor in the TheraBand to hold that symmetry. And that stance width is staying 20 centimeters, 30 centimeters, 30, all the way through. So he's got a consistent stance width there as he goes through it. So now what we do is we're going to look at Ruri First of all, try and walk back to the end of the course with the band on. This is quite interesting. It's where it gets really dangerous. That's quite a high level of skill there. Nice one, Rory. So as Rory goes through now we're going to put Rory in a different mindset. So now Rory has got himself to the top of a couloir, and down the couloir he knows, because the gradient, he's got to put a lot more spring into getting his skis off the ground at 45-degree pitch. So now Rory's going to try and go for distance and range. So let's have a look at Rory work through the dynamics, switch it up a little bit. Let's see us spring back, much more width coming across, and you can see straight away there, bigger dynamics working through. Awesome. Good work. So that's Rory, guys, just looking at it from a point of view of how you can put in a very simple element to try and control symmetry, but then when you want to switch up the dynamics, it turns into a slightly different element. So now we're going to watch Rory go through the jumping element, but on the jumping element, he's going to do it without the TheraBand, okay? But we're going to just see, as a test, what Rory's limit is, so his dynamic limit. And we'll have a look at what goes on in his legs. We'll have a look at how the upper body is managed and stabilised. And we'll sort of say that this is Rory pushing himself to his limit. So he's got no restrictions in terms of the TheraBand. He's not having to, in this run, he's not going to be thinking about the symmetry so much. He's going to be going for the distance and the range. So this is where we'll see quite a large explosion of leg extension to try and get Rory off the ground and creating distance across. Let's have a look how he goes on. So for this, again, guys, think about the safety element. Always think about your footwear. Make sure your footwear is done up correctly. You've got good support. We talked last week about footbeds. Footbeds, again, they're essential from this point of view of trying to get that distance and range and support as you're landing and taking off. Let's have a look at Rory's feet. So now he's actually getting the other side of the cones, much more distance, much more range. And you can see that work going through. And that's good. So what we're seeing here, development from a dynamic point of view. Again, a lot of people sort of wrote in and asked, why in this sort of specific movement? Are there other things that we could be doing for your skiing? And of course there are. There are lots of different things like jumping off boxes and plyometric exercises where you can boost that physiology side and get more strength and dynamics building. But in the very basic level of it, just jumping side to side and doing it over repetition. And we're not going to try and rush this into what we're showing you in this program. You guys have got a whole week to go away and work on this. So what we want to try and see you guys do from an exercise of staying at home and working at home exercises is, first of all, measure the distance that you get when you're doing it in a comfortable environment. And that means when you're controlling your symmetry, when you're technically on the ball and your body's aligned and set up for it. And we want to try and see how you progress and develop and what distance you can try and change. So let's say, for example, these cones are around about 1 meter apart. Why don't you say, if at a basic level, you're starting with the cones between 50 and 80 centimeters apart, depending on your height and how your physical sort of energy is. And see as you develop on, and given this session 15, 20 minutes every day during the week, and as we said before, you don't have to do it on concrete. A preferred choice would be on a grass that's got a bit more of an absorption when it's not obviously wet. And working your way through it, try and see how that develops and measure your change in distance. You will see development, but what we're asking you to do as you go through the development stages is be conscious of your body parts. Be conscious of your knee joints as they're landing, making sure there's no stress and you're not hurting in any areas, your lower back, making sure obviously as well in your foot area and your ankles, you're keeping those in the comfort zone. So this is going to be a little bit of a game of improving performance and dynamics. The leg extension you can test as well, between left and right. Rory, do you want to just show us your last bit of effort here, mate? Yeah. Rory's going to just show us some one-legged leg extension exercises. So this is another thing to test to see if you've got a difference between your left and right leg. So if you look at Rory here, he's just balancing and jumping with a much smaller range, just working through one leg to the other leg. And you get a really good simulation of what it's like pushing off of one turn to the next. Not so different, from a level of skiing, whether you're making snowplow turns, parallel or carving, it's still going to have that kind of work on the outside leg. To take it a stage further over the week, looking at extension, you can still have a think about working on a more basic level of hopping on one leg, side to side. and just testing between the two legs, which leg is the stronger and which leg is the weaker, which leg throws you off balance. Quite often you'll find that whenever you're working on it in this environment, you'll find your weaker leg. So from this week's session, guys, there's two things quite clearly to work on there. Taking aside the recap of last week and the symmetry, we want you to think about the dynamics of jumping side to side, measuring your distance. Start off at your basic level where you know you're not putting much effort in, and see what natural distance comes to you. Develop it over the course of a week and try and re-video it as the week goes on, but also measure it on a daily basis and see how much further you get. You may find that you're increasing by 5 or 10 centimeters over the course of a couple of days, which will be a great development anyway. And as we said, play around with seeing the difference between the left and right leg, isolate them, as Rory showed you, jumping from one leg to the other, using what is effectively the outside leg of the turn, you know, working on the outside ski, and that applies to quite a lot of different levels of skier. And then as I just showed you there, just jumping side to side on one leg on its own. And those three different elements to work on will make quite a bit of difference in terms of improving your leg extension and flexion and setting yourself up for the next stage of where we'll be taking you with these guys. That's it for this week. Some of the people that were writing in messages a few weeks ago wanted to meet Steph, and they asked Steph to come out and do some exercises. He's actually he's recovering from an ankle injury, but this is Stefan Nielsen, guys.
Hi everyone.
Yeah. Been with the academy for, God, how long have you been with us, Steph?
About 12 or 13 years, I think.
Sort of 13 years. So Steph is long-term sort of member of the academy, and who was it? Who was actually Chris? Do you remember who it was who asked to think?
Anthony, I can't remember his surname.
Anthony. So Anthony, just proof that Steph does exist outside of the ski season. So that's it, guys, for this week. We just want to just round off by saying thanks again for writing in all the messages. That was really useful, and I know we got a lot of feedback done. I know we got more phone calls to be doing today to people on the one-to-one basis. I know we were helping some people like Ed out there who was in between, like a classic conversation to do with do I buy the 184 or do I buy the 178 ski? You know, one's better for off-piste, one car's easier on-piste. We came to some really good solutions of assessing Ed's video that he sent in, his height, his body weight, and we really got to the exact point of when he went to purchase his skis. So I know he brought his skis this week, and we were talking to him about mounting his bindings specifically for that as well. So there's quite a lot that people seem to be getting done outside of the time that we're able to ski. As we said, good news, I know Verbier is opening on the 6th of June for mountain bikes, so that the lifts are running here. And there's, I think, a really strong chance Zermatt, where we do our summer skiing, we'll be doing the same. So we're going to keep you guys updated about that. We'll let you know what the content for next week's going to be, but please put your work in at home. Let's see some development in your distance. Let's see some development in your leg extension and flexion, and see how you can push on your dynamics towards the plyometric side of this to develop your skiing further still. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Thanks for all the feedback last week. Thanks for the Telegraph for writing the article. That was a really nice bit of feedback on what we're doing, and hopefully it is helping a few of you guys out there get through this lockdown time. Nice one, guys. Have a good weekend. Have a safe week, and we'll see you next week.